All aboard! Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, football fans of all ages, I am Beast Mikey. You have now arrived at my train of thought. It's now time to once again ask the question, where do we go from here? The answer to that in this video will be the AFC North, aka Hard Knocks division. The Steelers, the Ravens, the Bengals, and the team I'm going to start with, the Browns. And where do we begin? Now, obviously, I believe in the soul for a soul thing. I've made this clear on social media. A soul for a soul thing is pretty real to me. And the simple fact that I think both Ohio teams sold for the Buckeyes to win the national championship, but we're not talking about that right now. What I am going to talk about is how disastrous last year was for Cleveland, where pretty much nothing went right outside of Myles Garrett. I'll get to Garrett in a sec. And how, other than Jameis Winston being hilarious, especially on Hard Knocks, not much went right on offense either, to be honest. Not much went correct there. How bad was it? Well, they were the fifth worst in terms of total offense. To be fair, the passing game was not as bad as I thought it was going to be honest. It was only 11th worst. So I guess that's improvement. Which probably means the rushing offense was trash. Upon further review, the good news is it was the best in Ohio. The rushing attack. The bad news is it was fourth from the bottom. So is it really saying much? And that says more about the Bengals than anything. Yikes. So, and you would think a team as bad as Cleveland didn't score too many points, and they scored the least. So, yeah, not great. It was just not a good team. Very bad, awful type time on offense, and again, not much went right. They traded Amari Cooper and got draft picks. Sure. Okay, cool. They sold nicely on Cooper. Nick Chubb is now gone. And offensively speaking, other than David Njoku, what do you really have here? Defensively, yes, Garrett's a beast, but he's a one-man show. He's only one man. Cleveland, because of this, I would probably say bottom third in terms of total yardage. It just wasn't great overall. The passing game was good, and I think part of that is because of the sacks that Garrett can help create or get him, and then the production of Denzel Ward too. Cleveland was good there. They were hovering around the top 10 and actually 12th, so pretty good there. Which probably means the run defense was not great, and upon further review, it was bottom 12. So okay, cool. It's kind of take the good with the bad, so I guess that's fine. And the Browns, in terms of giving up points, in theory, you would think would also not be great. And the good news is they weren't last. The bad news is they were only sixth to last. So, yeah, in theory, a team that doesn't score all that well and gives up a good amount of points, you would think it would just be bad. And really, the last month or so of the Browns season came down to, okay, it became, all right, let's just tank it out. Let's figure out how high of a draft pick we can end up getting. Hope that you get some good luck from the Raiders and the Patriots and the Titans and some other teams and the Giants and some other squads to get a high draft picking. And they actually got that luck, to be honest. They actually got it thanks to the Giants and Raiders inexplicably winning games, and thanks to the Titans being pretty bad and the Patriots winning a game hilariously at the end. Cleveland ended up with the second pick, but I'll get into the draft picks momentarily. The Browns got that win in the snow against Pittsburgh and said, all right, that's enough, and opted and just didn't win for the rest of the year, including division losses to all three of their ops, and just generally getting blown out in most of these games down the stretch. So in theory, the Browns are going to have some cap room because Garrett aside, and Garrett just got paid again with a monster deal. I thought he wanted to win, but instead he's winning at his bank account, which I guess that works. Let's look at what the Browns have in terms of cap space. This is, again, over the cap, like I've used the entire time. Cleveland is currently under the cap, I should say, but they're not too far, I would say, under the cap. They have $10.8 million in space. That is from the bottom eighth. They're in the bottom 8 of the cap space realm. So this is why you probably haven't heard Cleveland's name too much, aside from the Garrett payday. They have draft picks, though, aside from the second overall pick, which, do you take a quarterback if you're the Browns? Do you take a Abdul Carter to go on the other side of Myles Garrett? Do you take offensive lineman help because their O-line, as good as some of the players are on it, can only last but so long? Cleveland's picking. They have the second pick, as I've mentioned. They have their picks in the second and third rounds. They have their pick in the fourth and fifth rounds. They have their picks in all the rounds, plus compensatory in the sixth. And they have Buffalo's third from the Amari Cooper deal. They have the Dolphins sixth, and they have the Vikings sixth. So really, round six, they pick from 181 to 216. They have 4 picks in this time period. So they can truly go to work with those picks or trade up. And trade up maybe into the 5th round and get some more. So we'll see what Cleveland's able to do. If anything, it just feels like their situation might be the worst in the NFL because they don't have a quarterback and they don't seem to know what they're doing. And Myles Garrett wants to win, but they don't have the resources to win. It's a mess. And they're stuck with Deshaun Watson's contract because of the restructuring for another 3 or 4 years. So it is a miserable situation for Cleveland. We're going to stay in Ohio and go to the Bengals now. And it's kind of is what might have been type of year. As good as the offense was, and it might have been the most devastating offense in football. Joe Burrow was leading in terms of the passing yards. And Jamar Chase was a Triple Crown winner. And T. Higgins was outstanding in terms of his production as a wide receiver too. It was as devastating of an offense as possible. They didn't run the ball that well, as I'll get to in a sec, and I've kind of explained. And yet, they were lethal and to be feared by many teams. But it's a what might have been season because you lose to New England week 1, and it's just, that's what kind of set things into motion for the Bengals not making the playoffs. You beat New England, you probably make it because you had tiebreaker on Denver and you probably would have been able to get in the playoffs, and we'll see what you would have done against Buffalo, but you kind of cost yourself a playoff spot by losing to New England at home, and losing to New England, as we know, is not the thing to do if you want to be successful. Cincinnati was very good, as I mentioned, with Burrow, Chase, and Higgins. They basically ended the season as strong as you possibly could have. I would say from the start of September, pretty much from Hard Knocks on, the Bengals were rolling. They absolutely rolled into the end of the year and did their thing. It was tremendous to see it. They won 4 straight to close out. That Denver game was absolutely insane. And Cincinnati is coming back with a pretty good attack, obviously, with Burrow, Higgins, and Chase. Higgins got franchised. So at least you have those 2 receivers for 1 more year, and then you got a major decision to make. And I think it's on the board that they both leave Cincinnati and get paid somewhere else. That price went up on Jamar Chase, and as time goes on, that price will continue to go up on Jamar Chase. For Cincinnati, they did have a top 10 offense, as I've mentioned. It was 9th overall in terms of yardage. Passing yardage, they were number 1, as I mentioned, because Burrow was number 1 in terms of overall and total yards. Cool, in terms of passing yards. Now, the rushing game, no good. They didn't pay Joe Mixon, and it showed. You finished 30th in rushing. That's not great. I like Chase Brown, but yeah, you got to do... It's just not great. And with all of this, their defense, their total yardage, they were 6th. So yeah, naturally, a very good team, a very good situation, at least a very good offense anyway. But then this defense, not great. And it showed because they were getting absolutely cooked in several games. From what Jaden Daniels did to them to what the Steelers did to them, and Pittsburgh putting a 40-piece on you is not something I'd recommend. Tennessee scoring 27 against anyone is not something I'd recommend. There were games where it was just, what are you doing? Those 2 Raven losses are also going to hurt, by the way, for Cincinnati, where they had reasons and chances to win both those games and opted not to win either of those games, or not opted not to win them, but just could not win them. It's just frustrating lots in life for Cincinnati. Defensively speaking, this was not a good one. It simply wasn't. They were 8th from the bottom in terms of total yardage, so you know this is bad. So we're already off to a bad start. And at least passing yardage, it wasn't awful. It was actually closer to mediocre, so I'd say below average there. Cool, fine, all right, we can live with that. But the rush defense, this seems bad, and it actually wasn't. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Kind of in the lower third. So, not terrible. Lower third or lower fourth. Not awful. Good. Not a bad setup. Not a bad move for Cincinnati. Not as bad as I thought. It's just, overall, just yardage is ridiculous, though. Points-wise, also not great. At least they're better than the Browns in this realm, but they're not better than many other teams. They were 8th worst in terms of points allowed, so that's not great for Cincinnati. A Bengals team with a lot of talent on offense, but the defense is obviously not picking up its own weight and needs to immediately. That offensive line also needs to pick up its own weight so they can allow Joe Burrow to carry the way he needs to. And Cincinnati, to minimal surprise, has $42.5 million in cap space as of right now. This puts them, it looks like, in the top 10 in cap space. Actually 12th, so it puts them 12th. Right between the Jaguars and the Bears. The Bears, they're like 100,000 more than the Bears almost. So that's where they currently are in terms of the cap space. It's pretty good, but will the Browns actually use it? Will Mike Brown actually use it? That's something we need to know. Well, we also need to know what those draft picks that Cincinnati has. Can they actually use them and use them well? The answer is that they have their picks in every round except the 7th. And the first of which is pick 17. Cincinnati's got a few needs. They're going to need to figure out the receiver core eventually. They're going to need to figure out what to do on defense, and to do a lot on defense, to be honest. They're going to have to figure out how to replace Sam Hubbard, who shockingly and abruptly retired, and they are starting to figure out, okay, we need to trade Trey Hendrickson. So what do they do? What will Cincinnati actually do to help fix the problems on defense that they already had, let alone the defensive problems that they've already created? We'll see what Cincinnati does. And I'm actually a little concerned they're just going to be left behind. It's going to be Burrow, Chase Higgins, and not much else, to be quite honest. We're going to go east from Ohio to Pennsylvania, and we're going to go to Pittsburgh. So the Steelers kind of had a 2020 remix. For those who may not remember, the Steelers started 11-0 in 20 and basically almost completely lost out, which included getting humiliated by the Browns in the playoffs. Now, this team wasn't as good as that one, but Pittsburgh did basically lose their games in December and crumble like graham crackers, only to get pummeled by another divisional op in the form of the Ravens. It was just not good for Pittsburgh. So, yeah, Pittsburgh closed their season out, which is just L after L after L. Like, the hard part of their schedule came, and we knew it was coming. Pretty much after the Browns get-back game came, and we knew this was going to be bad, as Pittsburgh would basically crumble, losing 5 straight, including that playoff loss to Baltimore. It was not great. So it included, but to be fair to them, Pittsburgh lost to, in these 5 games, the Eagles, who there's a reason why they haven't gone yet in this series. They lost to the Ravens, who are really good, and they will go next. The Chiefs, there's a reason why they haven't gone yet. The Bengals, who I just talked about, and were the hottest team in the league, ending the regular season. And then the Ravens again in the playoffs, which was not great, but it totally happened. It was just a really, really bad month for Pittsburgh. And part of this can be explained due to the offense just not carrying its weight. They kind of were sluggish. Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris somehow got to 1,000 yards. Harris did anyway. And it was just not a fun unit to watch, to be honest. Except for George Pickens' crash out moments. Those were fun to watch. Pittsburgh's offense, unfortunately for them, was a bottom 10 unit in terms of yards per game. It was total yards per game, not great. You would think some of that's due to the passing game. And it is. Because they were bottom 6 in that. They were the 6th worst. So, yeah, Russell Wilson and Justin Fields not getting it done there. So you can see why they're looking for a quarterback. The rushing game is at least decent. And I kind of expect it because of Harris and of Warren. Even though that offensive line, yeesh, it is not good. Not a good offensive line. They're 11th in terms of the rushing attack, which I think you can live with that if you're the Steelers. Okay, that's fine. You can rock with that. In terms of points allowed, in terms of points scored, Pittsburgh is actually in the top half of the league, so that's not bad. Okay, cool. And some of those points, obviously, on defense, but not bad. Not the worst thing in the world. Not the worst thing in the world there for the Steeler offense. Now, you expect the defense to be good, and it kind of was. they were hovering around the top 10 in terms of points, in terms of yards, which you kind of expect. In the passing yard game, they were actually towards the bottom, which I don't think is all that surprising because that secondary is sneaky overrated. The point does commit a lot of penalties. I will say that. I like some of the guys in that secondary, but as a unit, they just don't seem to. They seem to be missing something. Maybe they're missing a true CB1 until Joey Porter Jr. develops into that, but it just doesn't seem to work. The Steelers were 8th worst in terms of the passing yards, which is passing yards given up, which is a little surprising. What's not surprising is that they were 6th best in terms of rushing, in terms of rush defense, which that's not surprising. You kind of expect that with the crew they have in that front seven. And in terms of points, also not overly surprising that the Steelers were top 10 there. They were 8th in terms of points allowed. So also not a bit of a shock there. It's just the pass defense needs a CB1 and for Minka Fitzpatrick to be the safety that he's built to be. Those are just major things that needed, other than the elephant in the room of who's going to be the QB1? Questions I need answered. And another question I need answered is what you're going to do financially, Pittsburgh. You have the 4th most cap space as of now, $65.3 million. There are only 3 teams ahead of them, as I've mentioned, and 2 of them I haven't even talked about yet, which is kind of surprising. The only NFC team ahead of you are the Cardinals, which I had obviously just talked about recently. Seattle's 5th. And Pittsburgh is not known to go crazy in free agency, but what are they going to do? Are they going to go get Aaron Rodgers? Are they going to... Because there aren't too many other QBs left to get. And they did get help for whoever the QB is after trading for DK Metcalf and signing him to a $30 million AAV type year for 5 years. So, yeah, DK Metcalf and George Pickens on the same team. No, there's not going to be too many crash outs at all. No, not at all. This is basically the NFL equivalent to me of Brad Marchand and Matthew Tkachuk being on the same team, as they're going to terrorize some people, and it's going to be fun to watch if you're not a fan of the Steelers. Speaking of Pittsburgh, they just gave up that 2nd-round pick to Seattle, so they don't have that. They do have their picks in the first 3 rounds, and they have a 5th from the Rams. They have 7ths from New Orleans, Washington, and Denver. So that's where you're going to find the Pittsburgh draft picks. Not too many of them. Pittsburgh normally drafts fairly well, but this is not a QB draft, and the Steelers kind of need one. So what do you do if you're the Steelers? It's Aaron Rodgers, right? And if it's not Aaron Rodgers, what do you do if you're the Steelers? Do you go back to Russ? Or if it's not Russell or Aaron Rodgers, again, what do you do? What do you do if you're the Steelers? Now to Baltimore. And when it comes to the Ravens, they are incredibly entertaining. They are incredibly exciting. They do elite things. They have elite players. They have a former MVP. And yet, when we need them the most, they kind of show up the least. That is as frustrating as it must get for the Ravens, considering how good this team is and how fun they are and how dominant they can be, especially when it comes to running the football. Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry are nasty when it comes to running the rock together. It is how they do business. And it's part of the reason why the Ravens were the number 1 offense in the league in terms of total yardage. Because they just ran the ball down your throat and just did not stop until you were basically ran into dust. It was just wild to watch them do business that way. Now, passing yards, they were a little sluggish. They struggled, and okay, that's a lie. They were actually 7th. So, because Lamar Jackson continues to get busy and almost won himself another MVP, which would have been his 3rd in 6 years, which that's impressive in its own right. And then the run game, as I mentioned, is a reason why they were number 1. Because you have Derrick Henry, who had the quietest 1,900 yards in NFL history, and Lamar Jackson, who pitched in almost another 1,000. So, the Ravens were really, really dominant on offense. This team was straight up nasty. Lamar only had 950 yards because he's had 1,000-yard seasons before rushing, as we know. And then scoring the points, they were really good at it. And also 3rd. So, yeah, this offense was legit. And this was one of the best teams in football for a lot of the year. The defense. You would think this is a good defensive team. And it was. They were top 10 in this realm. And they were actually 10th, exactly, in this realm, in terms of total yardage. Now, the one fly in the ointment was their pass defense. They simply weren't good at it. which is weird because Kyle Hamilton, I expected to take a step forward, and he just never really did. Now, injuries were a part of it, and the cornerback situation was not great for a lot of the year, although Marlon Humphrey made some monster plays. I do think Nick Wiggins will eventually get right, but Nick Wiggins obviously just had some rookie lumps he had to take. They were 31st in terms of pass defense. It was just not great. They were better as the season went on, but as the start of the year happened, they were getting absolutely shredded. Now, in terms of the run defense, the Ravens are the best in the league at it, which I guess you can take the good with the bad in this realm, but the Ravens' run defense was nothing to be trifled with. Justin Matabuki and Roquan Smith and the crew that helped stop the run, regardless of who the coordinators are, because their coordinators left and the line coaches left. So, yeah, Baltimore's like that on defense, and they remain like that on defense for the most part. You would think getting a cornerback is going to be something they're going to try to do in the draft eventually, and maybe free agency as it goes on and officially starts the year tomorrow. So, in theory, Baltimore will do that. But what will Baltimore do financially speaking? The Ravens, as we know them as of now, are near the bottom in terms of cap space. They are fifth worst in terms of it at $5.5 million in space. So Baltimore's, you're probably not going to hear from them too much in terms of this free agency period. In terms of the draft, you may hear from them. And to be honest, I don't think there's any team I trust more than them when it comes to identifying talent in the NFL draft, because they draft monsters and they continuously develop, and they've got a lot of picks to develop with, because in some cases compensatory, in some cases because it's just their natural picks. They have natural or compensatory picks in every round, and they also have the Panthers' 6th round pick. So they're going to be pretty steady in terms of the drafting. They will pick 27th because obviously they're out late in the divisional round, so that's one drawback. But for Baltimore, it hasn't really mattered where they drafted. It just matters that they can get to the guys they want. And usually the guys they want to get are just nasty. So I'd be very concerned when it comes to the Ravens. If a guy that you like is on the board and your team doesn't take him, or your team can't get to him, and Baltimore has interest in them, have fun. So that's it. That's the AFC North. That's the Hard Knocks division as we get through the Ohio teams, Pittsburgh and Baltimore. Next up will be the AFC East. That is a division I know all too well because my favorite team is in it, the Dolphins. And then there's obviously the Jets, the Patriots, and the Bills. Some have been active in free agency. Some have not been active. Some are just trying to recoup some money. But for all four of them, we'll need to know where they go from here. New England, you will be the first stop on my next train of thought.